Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how to build a side table with a 3D illusion pattern and a turned leg. Before I started building this side table, I made a drawing of the tabletop. I had no idea what the tabletop would look like in reality, but it was exciting to make a new pattern that I hadn't done before. When the project began, I had already decided that the table would have a turned leg. Since I don't own a lathe, I had to buy a pre-turned post out of pine wood and use it as a table leg. Pine wood is not the most beautiful or durable wood, but it works. For the tabletop, I use purple heart, beech, maple, and walnut. I start by cutting the wood into 8mm thick pieces, which will be the thickness of the tabletop, before gluing the pieces together with a board of plywood. Now I cut the 8mm thick pieces into 2 cm wide strips. This is the final width of the pieces I will use for the tabletop. I adjust the angle of the sled to exactly 30 degrees. It is very important that the angle is set to exactly 30 degrees. To make sure my setup is correct, I run a few test strips and check that the angle is exactly 30 degrees by putting the pieces together. It looks great. The angle is exactly 30 degrees. I set the stop block to the same width as the ribs. Then I cut the ribs of purple heart so that the sides of each rhombus are 2.32 centimeters. Now I move the stop block to the same width as 2 ribs. Then I cut 18 pieces of maple, 18 pieces of beech, and 18 pieces of walnut. After each cut, I flipped the strip so that all the pieces are 2.32 centimeters on one side and 4.64 centimeters on the other side. Now it's time to move the stop block again. This time I set the stop block to the same width as 3 ribs. Once again, I cut 18 pieces of maple, 18 pieces of beech, and 18 pieces of walnut. This time the pieces will be 4.64 centimeters on one side and 6.96 centimeters on the opposite side. It's time to put the pieces together. I usually put the pieces together before gluing to see if all the pieces fit. Doing this will avoid any unpleasant surprises during the gluing. It is very easy to glue the wrong pieces together if you have not put the pieces together into the final pattern before you start gluing. I started by gluing together a small formation at the bottom, but then realized that it's easier to get the whole formation together if I glue the pieces together 2 by 2 before continuing. The last piece of the puzzle. It was quite easy and quick to glue the entire formation together. Most of the time was actually spent waiting for the glue to dry sufficiently before I could remove the clamps and continue with the next piece. All the pieces are glued together and the glue has dried. Now it's time to glue these onto a plywood sheet. time to build the frame around the tabletop. This wasn't included in the drawing, but had to be there to hide the side edges of the plywood sheet that was glued under the tabletop. I choose to make this in mahogany because this type of wood has not been used in the other pieces, and its shade is different from the other shades in the tabletop. The frame doesn't need to be that thick, so I cut the pieces to a width of 1.2 centimeters. I have cut the ribs at a 60-degree angle using the jig I built when I made the serving tray and glued 4 of them. Now I only need to glue the last 2 pieces. Then the frame is completely finished. I think this size of router bit will be good for the round corners. I saved the 6 corners on the edges. These are easier to round off with the sander. Excellent. The tabletop is completely horizontal in all directions. Now the fun part begins. I start by pouring all the epoxy onto the tabletop. Then I start painting the sides before smoothing the epoxy onto the tabletop. This epoxy is self-venting and self-leveling, so I don't have to worry about air bubbles or brushing a smooth surface. However, it is important that I add as few dust particles as possible, but completely dust-free is difficult to achieve in the environment I am in. If I notice that there is too much dust on the epoxy surface, I can sand it with a 2000 grit wet sandpaper and polish the surface until it is completely shiny again. Here I have started with the upper and lower parts of the table leg. I cut the joists to measure 5.7 by 4.2 centimeters. Then I run them through the planer until they measure 5.5 by 4.0 centimeters. I cut the pieces that will be attached to the underside of the tabletop to a length of 33 centimeters, and the pieces that will form the table's foot I make 3 centimeters longer. Time for some sanding. It's quick and efficient when you can use a belt sander. I round off the outer sides of the top pieces and the top sides of the bottom pieces. The edges that come towards the floor, I just sand a little carefully by hand to remove the sharp edges. Perfect fit. Now I have come to the part where I will cut the table leg to the correct length and cut out the grooves for the foot and top that I made earlier. Time for some gluing. To be absolutely sure that the top and foot are securely attached, I also attach both with 4 screws. Finally, it's time to varnish the table leg. The paint is thin as running water, so it will probably take 5 or 6 coats before you get a good surface. This time I choose to paint with semi-gloss clear coat. Before I apply the next coat of varnish, I glue the table top to the leg. This saves some time because I can then paint the underside of the tabletop at the same time as the leg. This is what the table looked like when it's finished. I am satisfied with the result. The 3D effect was actually better than I thought.